while on a long journey. My employer had estimated my miles incorrectly as I was traveling east through Montana, so I asked for an emergency fill-up. The nearest gas station where I could be accepted was mentioned in the email I received. Not really even close. I then made a left off the main road and started driving towards my stop. There is no moon, no city lights, and it is completely dark. It has been approximately an hour since I last saw any headlights. When I see something in the middle of the road at the furthest point of my headlights as I'm driving down the highway, I naturally slow down as I get closer to it. I give it a good look as I approach it and then slam on the brakes as I drive directly through the middle of the highway. What did I just see was all I could think about, so I backed up and stared in my mirror until I noticed its red silhouette in my brake lights. I apply the brakes, don my jacket, grab my torch and jump out of the truck. It was there when I went to the back of my truck and put my light on it. A skinless, twisted body with a distorted head. My jaw fell as I froze. I had no idea what I was seeing. I simply stood there, in the middle of the highway in the chilly still air, listening to my truck's hum from 50 feet away, as I observed the steam rising from this pile of meat. There was only a perfectly intact ribcage with a jumble of other random bones connected by ligaments. There was no fur or clothes. The ribcage was large enough for someone my size, so I pondered calling the police. However, I checked my phone and discovered that I had no cell service, and the closest town was around 50 miles away. A few coyotes were standing at the end of the road and stared at me when I put my phone away and flashed my light. They then started trotting in my direction as they entered through the barrier. I reasoned that I should get back in the truck at this point to avoid getting into trouble, so I did and carried on my journey. Whatever it was and whatever had transpired, I was practically a witness, but I still have no idea if it was a person or not. I persuaded myself that it was most likely a deer that had been struck by a truck similar to mine traveling at highway speeds, which would undoubtedly cause serious harm. However, looking back, I don't recall ever seeing roadkill without meat. My most frequent run is from San Francisco to Vancouver. Most of the time, there aren't many challenges on the trip. Due to less traffic, I frequently choose to drive late at night. Of course, I've seen my fair share of things while driving around in the middle of nowhere at witching hour. Bigfoot, UFOs, the whole 9 yards. However, none of that has ever made me feel nearly as frightened as the people you see walking along the roadside far from civilization. On a junior run down south on the number 5, I first observed one. It was a woman in a blue summer dress who was lazily strolling alongside the road when the moon was full. I was the first truck on the road that she probably saw since sundown, and we were now on a stretch that was miles and miles from anything in either direction. She didn't even turn to face me, but kept walking with a kind of empty smile on her face. I assumed that was the result of some hippie from the Oregon Trail getting high off of something from a neighboring campsite and continuing to drive. She wasn't the first, though. You don't always see them when you travel. However, occasionally you'll spot a few in one place. The fact that you never seem to see them during the day has always struck me as odd. Or perhaps you do, but they don't stand out quite as much in the sunlight. Even so, if you're aware of them, you'll start noticing them a lot whenever you're driving in the dark far from a city. Since they are usually on the shoulders, I prefer the term shoulder walkers that the other truckers use to describe them. They travel down that thin white line, moving almost like trains on a track. They come in a variety of sizes and forms. Men and women, people you would see anywhere. Sure, they're disturbing, but for a while I didn't give them much thought outside of the occasional glance as I drove by when they caught my eye. But a few months ago, I saw what appeared to be an elderly woman as I was driving by. She appeared to be on death row because she was wearing a hospital robe. Pale skin, frizzy white hair, and eyes that seemed like they had given up on life. When her grandchildren called her name, she grinned just like they had. Just by watching her, I could hear the sound of her hospital slippers running just above the gravelly road as she shuffled slowly along the shoulder. To be honest, she gave me the creeps, so I wanted to keep driving. However, God rest her soul, she made me think of my own wonderful granny. So I slowly came to a stop with my truck and got out of the vehicle after gathering my glovebox torch. Due to the lengthy wait, I had driven a few meters ahead of her, so I could hear her approaching before I could see her. Scrape continuously. I could picture her arthritic feet shuffle along in those hospital slippers. There was no way this elderly lady was going to walk more than 50 miles, so I quickly checked the Maps app on my phone to see which town was closest to where we were. I tucked my phone into my jeans, held up my torch and moved in the direction of her footsteps. "Hello, ma'am." In an effort to get her to respond, I called out. No such luck. Additional scraping is required. As I waited for her to enter in the faint light of my torch, my hairs were standing on end. I was on the verge of crying when the spectral figure came into view. She appeared so much more ill up close, not because anything had changed from before. "Ma'am, are you all right? You know you're in the middle of nowhere." She remained silent, just kept grinning and moved forward slowly. My heart was now racing rapidly. "She is simply senile. Senile and in need of my assistance," I said aloud. My feet, however, were immobile. Either they were returning to the truck or they were standing still. But when she got within around 10 feet, her aged hands started to tremble and gently stretch upward. Her fingers wiggled towards me like a grandmother groping for the face of her grandchild. She smiled at me with pale gums while opening her mouth but said nothing. My legs gave out, and as I rolled onto my side, she quickly and deftly reached down for me. She had her bony fingers around my ankles before I even realized what was happening, and I was being dragged down the road. I desperately tried to pull away, but she had such a strong hold that the extra weight didn't seem to slow her down at all. With her mouth gaping in a smile, she looked down at me with her beady, sunken eyes. I kicked at her with all of my strength, and fortunately I hit her in the jaw. It felt like I was kicking solid concrete, much to my horror. Fortunately though, despite having no obvious injuries, she let go. She continued to stroll down the shoulder as I stumbled backwards towards the center of the road. Her smile was tightly sealed as her hands dropped back to her sides. She shuffled out of the light of my torch slowly, but her eyes remained fixed on mine. After what turned out to be a half hour of stunned quiet, I finally mustered the courage to get up and return to my rig after waiting as the scraping gradually receded from my ears. There was no indication of the lady, but it didn't take me long to catch up with her after I stepped into my cab and rushed down the highway. She definitely had her eyes on me the entire time as she walked away, since they were still fixed on me. Her thin, chapped, and grinning lips were the last thing I saw of her as I sped away. I'm the first male I know to try to interact with a shoulder walker, and if God is good, I'll be the last, according to some other guys. Since then, while driving in the dead of night, I've seen several more. Even a child did I once see. However, I have no intention of ever stopping again for them. Smart people like you won't do it either. Since that evening, whenever I drive by, the shoulder walkers always gaze directly at me, which they never did before. Nearly as if they all did once that elderly lady noticed me. What would have occurred if I hadn't been able to escape makes me cringe to think about it. However, I can rest well knowing that I made my warning known to the public. Maybe this story will help a few people. A few years ago, I was a Costco delivery driver. It was during the season of the year. Due to the holiday season, we frequently shipped additional toy shipments to various regions. We received a call informing us that one of our rural Kentucky sites needed to refill their enormous Spider-Man dolls. They gave me the last-minute, late-night assignment since they knew I was a quick driver. I prepared my truck and departed on the 265 road. I first felt uneasy at 3 in the morning. I took a couple of NoDoz and put it down to just being weary. After about 15 minutes, the road began to become foggy. I mean more so than at any earlier or later point in history. I had to pull over to the side and wait until it got to that point. I reasoned that since there were no other vehicles on the road and I was early, I could wait until it started to clear up a bit. After about 5 minutes of silent stillness, my truck loses power. No engine, No lights, nothing. I attempt using my CB, but no one answers. There is no signal when I check my cell phone. I'm sitting here deciding what to do next. I notice what appears to be a youngster weeping. It gradually changed into a woman sobbing. That's how it sounded to me, at least. I'm a large man, 6 feet 3 inches, and 250 pounds, but I resisted getting out of the cab. I did roll down my window and inquire about anyone in need of assistance. The crying eventually stopped after that. Then I perceived what appeared to be a menacing laugh. I thought the laughter was being directed at me at that time. I pulled up my window and noticed that the laughter appeared to get louder the more terrified I got. Then it started, then it stopped. My truck immediately started back up, and the fog quickly disappeared. I sped off like a bat out of hell in my car. When I reach the following truck stop, I drive in. Did that really just happen? I frantically questioned myself as I dashed to the toilet and splashed water on my face, but couldn't shake the noises out of my head. I used to work a shift called meet and turn many years ago. In this scenario, the driver who lives outside the city will take the load halfway to its destination while the second driver meets him there and delivers the load. I had been performing these runs for several months when I learned that I needed to arrive at the meeting location an hour before the other driver. Around 3 in the morning, the lot was dark and deserted, so I made the decision to close my eyes and take a quick nap because I still had some time to kill. I was roused from my snooze by a barking dog around 10 minutes in. I made an effort to ignore it, but the bark persisted for a while, getting louder and closer. He was either attempting to warn me of something at this point, or he was just being a pain. I sat up and peered out the window, and the scene I saw rendered me immobile. A massive man who appeared to be approximately 35 stood there, only inches on the other side of the glass, barking at me. His eyes were wild, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness of it all struck me, and without making any abrupt moves, I reached down, turned on my vehicle, and slowly began to back out of the parking space. He continued to bark as I continued to back away, and as he did so, he was pursuing me like an enraged dog might, while also running after me. Needless to say, I no longer nap while working. When I was traveling through Kansas at night on I-70, I once encountered one of the most bizarre thunderstorms I've ever seen. The situation was southwest terrible that the road began to flood a little. I was forced to pull into a service station to wait it out when the eerie thing occurred. There were several lightning strikes while I was in the vehicle observing the storm, and then there was a blackout. Unexpectedly, a very bright light that is traveling too quickly to be a storm system and too slowly to be an airplane suddenly appears behind the clouds. It ascends above the hills and trees, crosses directly overhead, and then briefly vanishes behind the service plaza. It only took a few minutes to travel from the forest line to the plaza, and when it passed overhead, it illuminated the parking lot and put an eerie blue glow over everything. I genuinely believed that aliens were invading. Anyway, once the eerie light vanished, it stopped raining totally and the parking lot lights turned back on in just 10 minutes, as if someone had switched a switch. Looking in my mirrors for spacecraft or those alien walkers from War of the Worlds, I left the area but the memories remained. Thank you again for joining us for another video. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe and comment down below and let us know what you would like to hear in the near future. See you all again soon.